My name is Allison Granger, and I have always considered myself a woman of solitude. I was born and raised in the bustle of Philadelphia, but the noise, the constant press of bodies, and the suffocating rhythm of the city wore me down before I even reached my 30s. After years of saving, I finally left behind the crowded streets and fluorescent, lit offices for something quieter, something remote. I bought a small log cabin tucked deep in the Appalachian foothills of West Virginia. It wasn't luxurious, not by any measure. The roof sagged in the middle. The fireplace drew smoke into the room, if the damper wasn't pulled just right, and the plumbing rattled every time I ran water. But it was mine. Out there, I was free of neighbors, free of chatter, free of everything except the sound of the forest and the crackling of my own fire. Solitude can feel like peace until something shakes it loose. On the night I first saw the lantern, I realized solitude can also mean being helplessly alone. It was late October when the storm rolled in. The kind of storm that doesn't just rain but howls, rattling every window pane and bending the trees into frantic silhouettes. The wind pushed heavy sheets of water against the glass, and the lightning split the sky in quick, stuttering flashes that turned the forest outside into a skeletal panorama. My power had gone out around 9 o'clock, which wasn't unusual for storms out here, so I lit candles and wrapped myself in a blanket by the fireplace. I remember hearing the thunder roll far longer than it should have, like it was circling the house, refusing to leave. I distracted myself with a paperback novel by lantern light, the rain drumming a steady percussion against the roof. And then, somewhere between one page and the next, I noticed movement at the edge of my vision. The window above the sink in my tiny kitchen looked out onto the slope behind the cabin. Beyond the glass, rain shimmered in the glow of something swinging, swaying, cutting through the dark. It was a lantern, an old, iron-handled lantern glowing with the dull, steady flame of kerosene. My heart stuttered, and I froze in my chair. I lived miles from the nearest town. My only neighbor, an elderly man named Jim, lived nearly 4 miles down the dirt road that wound through the woods. No one should have been anywhere near my property in the middle of that storm. And yet, there it was, a lantern, hanging just feet outside my kitchen window, drifting back and forth as if suspended by an invisible hand. I stood slowly, the book falling shut in my lap. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put and to keep the lights dim, but curiosity tightened its claws in my chest. I crept closer, careful not to knock the candle from the counter. The rain obscured everything, streaking down the glass in silver ribbons. But the lantern was impossible to miss. It swung rhythmically, almost hypnotically, its glow casting pale shadows across the siding of my cabin. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure behind it. Something dark, vaguely human-shaped. But when lightning tore the sky open again, there was nothing. Just the lantern. I pressed my hand to the cold glass, feeling my breath fog the pain. Who would carry such an old-fashioned light out here? A storm chaser? A lost hiker? No, it didn't make sense. No one wandered this far into the woods by accident. The lantern's glow wavered, dimming as though the flame inside were fighting the wind. Then it brightened, stronger than before, washing the window in amber light. The swaying slowed until the lantern hung perfectly still. I realized, with a sickening twist in my stomach, that it was no longer moving at the mercy of the storm. It was moving with intention, as though it knew I was watching. I stumbled back from the window, nearly toppling one of the candles on the counter. My heart pounded so loudly, it seemed to drown out the thunder. I wanted to convince myself it was a trick of the storm. Some forgotten tool, blown loose from a neighbor's shed. But I knew better. The lantern remained at the window for hours. I sat rigid in a chair across the room, blanket clutched to my chest, refusing to look directly at it, but always feeling its glow burn against the side of my face. Each time lightning flashed, I prayed it would reveal nothing standing there, and each time, my prayers went unanswered. There was no figure, no shadow, just the lantern itself, impossibly hanging in the storm. At some point after 3 a.m, exhaustion dragged me into sleep. I woke to silence. The storm had passed, and weak dawn light seeped through the windows. The lantern was gone. The first thing I did was rush outside, barefoot, the wet ground cold against my feet. My yard was littered with branches, leaves, and debris from the storm. But there were no footprints, no drag marks, no evidence that anyone had stood outside my cabin at all. The only sign of disturbance was directly beneath my kitchen window, a patch of soil darker than the rest, as though it had been scorched. I crouched there, staring at it, the chill of the morning sinking into my bones. It wasn't just wet, it was charred, as if fire had licked the earth during the storm and left only a blackened scar. I didn't tell anyone about the lantern at first. What was I supposed to say? That some ghostly light floated outside my window. That fire burned in the middle of a downpour. Even I didn't believe it fully, not until it returned. The second night came without rain. The air was crisp and silent, the stars sharp in the black sky. I tried to reassure myself, telling myself the storm had made me see things. Hallucinations happen under stress, don't they? I had been alone too long. Maybe I was letting the woods play tricks on me. But at exactly midnight, I heard it. Think of metal outside the window, like the hinge of a lantern handle, straining under weight. I forced myself not to look. Instead, I sat by the fire, hands gripping the arms of my chair, so hard they ached. The sound came again, closer, louder. My chest burned with each shallow breath. Finally, against my better judgment, I turned. The lantern was back. This time, it didn't sway. It pressed itself against the glass, close enough that I could see the flickering flame inside, close enough that the glow painted my walls in orange light. The glass fogged around it as though the lantern itself exhaled. And for the first time, I saw a shadow behind it. Not in the storm, not in the lightning, but clear and deliberate. The outline of a figure holding the lantern aloft, its hand too long, its arm too thin. When I blinked, the shadow vanished, but the lantern remained, burning steady. I couldn't move. My body was stone, my throat locked tight. I told myself I'd scream, I'd grab the phone, I'd run. But all I did was sit there, staring as the lantern's light pulsed brighter and brighter until it filled the cabin. Then, without warning, it went out. Darkness crashed around me, thick and suffocating. I scrambled for the candle on the table, my fingers shaking too badly to strike a match. When I finally lit it, the flame sputtered weakly, casting more shadows than it banished. The window was empty, but on the glass, etched in streaks of condensation, were 4 words written from the outside. Lelitimi com ein. I stood frozen in front of the message, scrawled across the glass, the candle trembling in my grip. My mind tried to cling to reason. Maybe it was condensation shaped by the storm. Maybe just streaks from the rain. But no, the words were deliberate, written with a finger, every letter sharp and unmistakable. Leli Tme Kiam En. The fire in the hearth had burned low, the last embers glowing faintly red. The silence pressing in was heavier than any thunder. I couldn't even hear the forest outside. No wind in the trees. No crickets, no owls. Just me and that message on the glass. I backed away slowly until the back of my knees hit the sofa, and I sank into it, pulling the blanket over my lap as though that thin barrier could shield me from whatever stood outside. The lantern was gone, but I swore I could still see the glow imprinted behind my eyelids, as though I'd stared at the sun. Sleep never came. I sat rigid until dawn bled into the horizon, the condensation fading from the window with the warming light. By morning, the words were gone, evaporated into nothing. I told myself then that I had imagined it. Stress, isolation, a trick of the eyes after hours of staring into the dark. I repeated it like a prayer as I forced myself through a day of chores. Stacking wood, sweeping out the mud tracked in by the storm, boiling water on the propane stove. Anything to stay moving, anything to drown out the memory of those 4 words. By late afternoon, though, the unease gnawed so deep I couldn't ignore it. I drove into town, an hour on the winding dirt road, another 40 minutes on the main highway, and stocked up at the general store. I bought new locks, heavier curtains, an extra flashlight, and, for the first time since moving out here, a shotgun. I'd never handled one before, but the thought of being caught unprepared made my stomach churn. The clerk, a round-faced woman with crow's feet etched deep around her eyes, watched me pile the counter with supplies. "Storm keep you up last night?" she asked casually. I hesitated. "Yeah." "Storm." She studied me longer than felt comfortable, like she could read the truth on my face. "Be careful out there," she said finally. "Nights get strange in those hills." It wasn't the words themselves that rattled me. It was how she said them. With a softness, almost sympathy, like she knew exactly what I meant to hide. I drove back before dark. The shotgun across the passenger seat, the weight of it, both reassuring and horrifying. I had chosen solitude, but now I wished desperately for another pair of eyes, someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. That night, I kept every light in the cabin burning. Candles, lanterns, even the dim glow of the battery. Powered radio I left on the table. The storm had cleared, but the silence outside was worse than any thunder. I sat awake by the fire, the shotgun across my knees, and I waited. Midnight came, and with it, the faint creak of metal. I knew the sound too well by then. My stomach dropped, bile rising in my throat. Slowly, as the lantern was there. It hovered just outside the glass again, its glow steady, impossibly bright against the black woods. But this time, it didn't sway. It inched closer, pressing to the window pane, as if whoever, or whatever, held it was leaning in. The flame inside flickered, casting wild shadows that stretched across my walls. And then I saw it. A face, not a face like yours or mine. The glow revealed something pale, almost waxy, features stretched too thin, eyes like black glass marbles, reflecting the flame. It was there for only a heartbeat before the lantern flared and blinded me. When I blinked, the face was gone, but the glow remained. My hands trembled on the shotgun. I should have fired through the glass, should have ended it, but I couldn't lift the barrel. My body wouldn't obey. It was as though the lantern's light pinned me in place, rooting me to the chair. Then came the sound. A faint tap, tap, tap on the glass. Deliberate, as though a finger rapped from the outside, waiting for me to answer. I wanted to scream, to drown the cabin in noise, but my throat stayed locked. All I managed was a hoarse whisper, "Go away." The tapping stopped. The lantern's glow dimmed, then flared once more before it pulled back from the glass, receding into the darkness. I stumbled to the window, slamming the curtains shut with shaking hands, my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I found more evidence. Beneath the window, pressed deep into the soft earth, was a single footprint. It wasn't shaped like a human foot. Not really. Too long, too narrow, with toes that curved into sharp points like claws. The sight of it sent me reeling back toward the house. Every instinct screaming, that I was in danger. I tried to convince myself to leave, to drive back to the city, to abandon the cabin altogether. But pride and stubbornness held me there. I had spent years building this life. I wasn't about to let some phantom lantern chase me away, so I prepared. I nailed boards across the windows, stacked salt lines at every threshold, and kept the shotgun within reach at all times. I even drove into town again and asked Jim, the only neighbor within miles, if he had ever seen strange lights in the woods. He squinted at me, his face weathered and unreadable. "You ought not be asking questions you don't want answers to," he said finally. "Some things out here you don't invite in. You hear me?" I wanted to press him, but the warning in his voice stopped me cold. I drove back with my stomach in knots, his words looping endlessly in my head. Some things you don't invite in. The third night was the worst. The air was heavy, thick, even without rain. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Every branch still, every creature silent. I sat in the living room, shotgun clutched tight. The boards over the windows making the cabin feel like a coffin. At midnight, the tapping returned. Not at the kitchen window this time, at the glass behind me. The lantern had moved to the back of the cabin, pressing itself to the only uncovered window above the sink. Its glow spilled across the walls, flickering, pulsing like a heartbeat. And this time, the words appeared again. Condensation streaked the glass, letters forming with agonizing slowness until the message was complete. PLEAs, let me e. Come I in. The please chilled me more than the demand before. It made the thing outside feel patient, deliberate, as though it knew it had all the time in the world. I stumbled back, tripping over the rug, the shotgun nearly slipping from my hands. The lantern pulsed brighter, and through its glow, I swore I saw the figure again. The thin arm, the glassy eyes, the grin too wide for its face. I raised the shotgun, finger trembling on the trigger. For a moment, I thought I could do it, that I could finally end it. But before I could fire, the flame inside the lantern flared white, filling the cabin with blinding light. When the glow receded, the lantern was gone. The window was bare. But across the boards I had nailed to the front window, new letters were scorched into the wood, black and smoking, as though burned there from inside the house itself. So, when I saw that single word burned into the boards, sewn, something in me broke. I wanted to believe I was still sane, that stress or isolation had twisted my senses, but scorched wood doesn't lie. The smell of it lingered in the cabin, acrid and heavy, as though the house itself was warning me I wasn't safe anymore. I didn't leave that day, though I should have. Pride, fear, stubbornness. I can't say which one rooted me to that cabin, but I stayed. I told myself I'd make it through one more night, that I'd keep the shotgun close, and the doors bolted. and then in the morning I'd pack up and go. I repeated it like a mantra, while I loaded shells, while I sealed every window seam with duct tape, while I dragged furniture across the doors. But the forest has its own sense of time. Night fell too fast, shadows swallowing the last thin glow of the sun before I was ready. The woods outside went quiet again. That same terrible stillness. Even the insects hushed, like they knew something was coming. I lit every candle, every lantern, until the cabin flickered with light. But no matter how many flames I set, the darkness pressed harder at the windows, thick and heavy, like it was alive. By 11, exhaustion dragged at my bones. I sat in the armchair with the shotgun resting across my knees, eyelids heavy, the fire sinking to red embers. My head dipped once, twice, before I jerked awake to a sound that curdled my blood. Creak. Not outside. Inside. The sound of a floorboard groaning under weight, coming from the kitchen. My breath hitched. I raised the shotgun, forcing myself to my feet, every muscle screaming with tension. The cabin was small. From where I stood, I could see the edge of the kitchen table, the sink beyond. At first, nothing. Just flickering candlelight, shadows shifting against the log walls. Then, a glow. Faint at first, then growing. The lantern. It wasn't outside anymore. It sat on my kitchen counter, flame burning steady, glass fogging as though something breathed against it. I hadn't left the doors open. I hadn't unlatched a single window. Yet it was here, inside my home. I aimed the shotgun at it, chest heaving. Get out, I whispered, though my voice was a rasp of terror. The flame inside the lantern flared white. Every candle in the cabin guttered out at once, plunging the room into suffocating darkness. The only light left came from that single lantern on the counter, and in its glow, a figure stepped forward. I don't have words big enough for what I saw. Its limbs were too long, bending at wrong angles, its skin pale as wax, stretched thin over bones that seemed too sharp to be human. The eyes were pits of black glass, catching the light of the flame, but never reflecting it. And the smile, that impossible smile, split its face too wide, teeth small and even like a doll's. It carried the lantern in one hand, but the flame didn't flicker. It burned steady, as though nothing in the world could disturb it. Let me in, it said. The voice didn't come from its mouth. It seeped from the walls, from the floor, from inside my own skull. A whisper that rattled every part of me. You already are. I choked out, tightening my grip on the shotgun. Its head tilted, joints popping like snapping twigs. Then it laughed, a sound like wind whistling through a broken chimney, thin and sharp. The lantern's glow spread wider, filling the room until the walls themselves seemed to ripple in the light. The figure moved closer, its bare feet silent on the wood floor. I backed away, heart hammering, raising the gun until the barrel aimed squarely at its chest. fired. The blast shattered the silence, deafening in the small space. The lantern flew from its hand, glass shattering across the floor. For one glorious second, I thought I'd done it, that the thing would collapse and vanish like smoke. But the flame didn't die. The pieces of broken glass on the floor still burned, each shard glowing with that same steady flame. The creature stood unbroken, black eyes fixed on me, smile widening until the corners of its mouth split the skin. "You can't stop me," the whisper rattled. "You invited me the first night you looked." My knees buckled. I fired again. And again, the shotgun shells exploding through the cabin, tearing splinters from the walls. But the creature didn't flinch. The flames only spread, each shard of glass blooming into a new lantern, until the room glowed with dozens of swaying lights. I stumbled backward, smoke choking the air, until my spine hit the front door. My hands fumbled with the lock. But before I could twist it, the wood burned hot beneath my palms. The word carved into it before still lingered, now blazing bright. "Swan." The door seared my skin, forcing me back. My eyes watered, lungs clawing for air. The creature stepped closer, lantern flames flickering around it like a crown. "Let me stay," it whispered. Something inside me snapped then. Survival or madness, I don't know which. I lunged for the fireplace poker, swinging it wildly. The iron bar connected with one of the lantern shards, shattering it. The flame sputtered and died. For the first time, the creature recoiled. Hope surged. I smashed another shard, then another, each flame extinguishing under the iron. The whispers rose to a screech, the cabin shaking around me. But I kept swinging, destroying every burning shard I could find. Finally, only one flame remained, the lantern still clutched in the creature's hand. It howled, a sound that rattled the glass in the windows and raised the light high. I drove the poker straight through it. Glass shattered. Flame burst, then vanished, leaving only darkness. When my eyes adjusted, the creature was gone. The cabin reeked of smoke and gunpowder, the walls scorched, the floor littered with broken glass. My hands shook so badly I dropped the poker, collapsing onto the rug. I stayed there until dawn broke, too terrified to move, too drained to cry. When the first light touched the trees, I gathered what little I could carry and left. I didn't bother to board the windows or clean the wreckage. I just walked out, locking the door behind me, though I knew it meant nothing. I drove until the forest was far behind, until the mountains shrank in my mirrors, until the sun stood high and steady in the sky. Only then did I breathe without shaking. I never went back to the cabin. I sold the land through a realtor who didn't ask questions, who didn't need to know why the boards over the windows were blackened with scorch marks. But I still see it. Some nights, when storms rattle the city, windows When rain blurs the streetlights into halos, I catch a glow at the edge of my vision. A lantern swaying, waiting. And sometimes, when the glass fogs with condensation, I see words forming there. Let me come in. My name is Eric Palmer, and I have always lived with a preference for quiet, steady routines. At the age of 39, I had settled into a life that could best be described as predictable, though I did not mind. I worked as an archivist at the county records office, a job that demanded attention to detail and rewarded patience, both of which came naturally to me. My home, a modest two-story house on the edge of town, had been passed down from my parents, who had moved south after retirement. It sat at the end of a long road, lined with oaks that reached over like a cathedral ceiling. And while some might have considered the neighborhood too isolated, I had always valued the privacy. The landline, telephone mounted on the kitchen wall, had been there for as long as I could remember. It was an older model with a coiled cord and a receiver that still carried the faint static hum of a bygone era. I had kept it for sentimental reasons, though I rarely used it anymore. Most of my communication, like everyone else's, had shifted to cell phones and email. The landline served no real purpose, except to occasionally receive telemarketer calls, and yet I never considered removing it. Perhaps it was a tether to the familiar, to a time when life had been simpler and the world seemed more comprehensible. On the night in question, the weather was particularly violent. A thunderstorm had rolled in from the west, sweeping over the town with heavy sheets of rain and wind that rattled the windows in their frames. The digital clock on my nightstand read 12:07 a.m., and though I had been attempting to read myself into sleep, the flashes of lightning and the rolling crashes of thunder kept pulling me back to wakefulness. The storm was unrelenting, pounding on the roof and echoing down the chimney like distant artillery. That was when the phone rang. It startled me, not only because of the hour, but because the sound of the landline was so rare. The shrill tone sliced through the noise of the storm, carrying with it a strange weight, as though it did not belong in the year 2023. I swung my legs out of bed, padded down the hallway, and made my way into the kitchen, where the phone glowed faintly under the fluorescent light above the sink. The ring echoed in the tiles, sharp and insistent. I lifted the receiver and pressed it to my ear. At first, I thought no one was there. What I heard instead was the unmistakable sound of rainfall, not the muffled patter of water on my roof, but an amplified, almost cavernous echo of rain, as if I were standing beneath a metal awning during a downpour. It was strangely hollow, resonant, and it filled the line with a steady hiss. "Hello?" I asked, my voice tentative. The rain continued. I pressed the receiver tighter against my ear, convinced it was some kind of interference. Perhaps the storm had created a feedback loop, or some freak transmission of atmospheric noise. I listened harder, but there was nothing except the rhythmic cascade of water, relentless and distant, as though pouring endlessly down concrete walls. Who is this? I tried again, my voice firmer, and then, faintly, beneath the rush of rain, came a whisper. It said my name. Not shouted, not spoken, but whispered so close to the receiver it felt as if the breath might fog against my cheek. Eric. I froze, my throat tightening. My first thought was that someone was playing a prank, perhaps a teenager who had discovered the number and wanted to get a rise out of me. But the way my name was spoken, drawn out, soft, threaded with an intimacy that made my skin crawl, was unlike any prank I had ever encountered. It was not mocking or playful. It was knowing. I slammed the receiver down and stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller. The storm pressing against the walls, the shadows lengthening in the corners. I stood there, listening to the rain hammer against the windows, wondering if I had truly heard what I thought I had. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, staring at the phone as though it might ring again. It did not. The hours passed slowly, marked by the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the counters and the drip of water seeping through a small leak near the window frame. At some point, exhaustion claimed me, and I dozed in the chair, though my dreams were restless and filled with the sound of static rainfall. The following morning, I tried to rationalize the experience. Perhaps it had been a crossed line, though the technology for such interference hardly existed anymore. Or maybe it had been some automated spam call, a recording layered with ambient noise. I convinced myself that the whisper had been a trick of my imagination, a brain desperate to make sense of meaningless sound. By daylight, such explanations felt sufficient. But then the phone rang again. It was 2 nights later, just past midnight once more, and another storm had descended on the town. The timing alone made my blood run cold. I hesitated this time, letting it ring twice, 3 times, before I forced myself to answer. Again, I was met with the sound of rain, the exact same echo, the same hollow cascade of water through some unseen cavern. I gripped the receiver, my knuckles white, and held my breath, listening for anything beyond the noise. Seconds ticked by, my heart pounding in my ears. Then, the whisper returned. This time, it was clearer, more deliberate. The syllables lingered like damp fingers pressing against my skin. My stomach lurched, and I felt a wave of cold radiate through my body. I slammed the phone down again, my breathing sharp and ragged. But before I could step away, it rang once more. I stared at it in disbelief, the shrill tone piercing the thunder outside. My hand trembled as I reached for the receiver again. unsure if I wanted to hear what awaited me. Slowly, almost against my will, I lifted it to my ear. No rain this time. Instead, there was silence, so deep and absolute that I thought for a moment the call had dropped. I was about to hang up when the whisper slid through the void, closer than ever. "I know you hear me." The voice was low, gravelly, and laced with a peculiar patience, as though whoever, or whatever it was, had all the time in the world. My knees buckled slightly, and I braced myself against the counter. "Who are you?" I demanded, though my voice broke. The silence stretched, oppressive, until the line went dead with a sharp click. I stood in the kitchen, clutching the receiver, unable to move. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened window over the sink, pale and hollow-eyed. The storm outside roared, but inside the house, it was as if everything had narrowed down to the sound of my name spoken in that voice, still lingering in my head like smoke that refused to dissipate. That night, I locked every door and window, though I knew it was irrational. Whoever called was not standing outside my home. It was something stranger, something that reached me in a way locks could not prevent. In the days that followed, I carried my cell phone everywhere, refusing to answer the landline. Yet I could not bring myself to disconnect it, as though doing so might anger the presence behind those calls. I kept glancing at the phone whenever the wind shifted or thunder rolled across the horizon. And when the skies darkened with another storm the following week, I found myself sitting in the kitchen once again, staring at the phone, waiting for it to ring. And it did. The phone rang again, as if on cue with the storm's arrival. Lightning illuminated the kitchen in a harsh flash, followed by a crack of thunder that rattled the glass in the cabinets. My hand hovered over the receiver, fingers trembling as though I were about to grasp something venomous. For a long moment, I let it ring, each shrill tone crawling deeper into my nerves. I could not shake the thought that if I ignored it, the sound might never stop, that the ringing would persist until I answered, demanding my attention like a parasite gnawing on bone. I finally lifted the receiver, pressing it cautiously to my ear. The rain was there again. The same cavernous downpour, like water rushing against stone walls. It filled the line with a steady hiss that grew louder the longer I listened, as if the storm on the other side were moving closer. The whisper came, drawn out and intimate. This time, I did not slam the phone down. I forced myself to hold it, my jaw locked, sweat slicking my palm against the receiver. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice hoarse, my throat dry. The line hissed with rainfall. No answer came at first. I thought maybe I had broken through, that maybe my defiance would drive it away. But then, a new whisper emerged. Not just one voice, but many. A chorus, hushed yet overlapping, each one speaking my name. They varied in tone, some deep, some high, some distorted by static, but all of them unmistakably whispering, "Eric." I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. The receiver swung on its cord. Banging against the wall, the hiss of rainfall spilling into the room through its tiny speaker. I clutched the counter for balance, heart hammering, the air thick, as though I had run a mile. The phone went dead on its own. I backed away, unable to look at it any longer. The storm outside screamed against the house, but the greater storm was inside me. A gnawing fear that I was being sought out, pulled into something I could neither see nor understand. The next day, I tried to convince myself again that it had to be a trick of some kind. But who could orchestrate such a thing? What kind of technology could mimic rainfall, weave whispers into static, and know my name so intimately? Even if it were possible, why target me, of all people? I was no one of importance. I had no enemies, no secrets, no debts. My life was painfully ordinary, yet the calls persisted. Always during storms, always near midnight. Sometimes the whisper came immediately. Other times, the line held me hostage with long stretches of rain before the voice emerged, patient and deliberate. More than once I tried shouting into the receiver, but the voice never faltered. It would say my name again and again, until I could not take it any longer. The worst was the fifth call. It was a Thursday night, rain hammering against the windows, and when I answered, the whisper said something different. "Look outside." My stomach turned to ice. Slowly, I moved to the kitchen window, phone clutched against my ear, the rain's echo filling the silence between us. The backyard was dark, drenched in water, the oaks swaying under the wind's assault. I scanned the lawn, half expecting to see a figure standing there, illuminated in the lightning's flash. But then, faintly, the whisper again, closer. I pressed my forehead against the glass, peering into the drenched night. For a moment, I thought I saw movement at the tree line. A shape, darker than the shadows, shifting between the trunks. My breath fogged the glass, and in that split second of distraction, lightning split the sky. For the briefest flash, I thought I saw a face staring back at me from the trees. Pale, featureless, except for the suggestion of a mouth stretched too wide. I stumbled back, slamming the phone onto the hook so hard the plastic cracked. My pulse thundered louder than the storm. That night, I did not sleep at all. I sat with every light on in the house, curtains drawn. My cell phone clutched tight in my hand, as though it could shield me. But no matter how bright the bulbs burned, the house still felt heavy with shadows, and no matter how much I told myself it had to be a trick of lightning, the image of that pale face lingered in my mind like a brand. By the weekend, I could not take it anymore. I called the phone company, demanding they check the line. The technician on the other end was polite, if unconvinced. He assured me the storm activity might be interfering with the connection and offered to schedule a line inspection. I agreed, desperate for any rational explanation, though deep down I knew no inspection would reveal whispers calling my name. When the technician arrived the following Tuesday morning, the skies were clear, the sun bright. He spent nearly an hour testing the wires outside, running diagnostics on the wall unit, and even listening to the line himself. He found nothing unusual. The signal was strong, the equipment intact. He left with a shrug and a recommendation to replace the old handset if I remained concerned. That night, the storm returned. The phone rang at 12:03 a.m. Every nerve in my body screamed not to answer, but leaving it unanswered seemed worse somehow, as though not acknowledging it would grant the voice freedom to find me elsewhere. I lifted the receiver, my hands clammy, and pressed it to my ear. The rainfall was deafening this time, crashing like waves against cliffs. And beneath it, the whisper did not hesitate. "Eric, open the door." My throat closed. I stood frozen in the kitchen, eyes darting toward the front of the house. Lightning illuminated the hallway, throwing shadows across the walls. The storm outside rattled the door in its frame, but the whisper pressed on, insistent. "Open it." "No," I managed to croak, my voice breaking. The whisper fell silent. For a long moment, the only sound was the endless rain hissing through the receiver. Then, softly, it laughed. Not loud, not mocking. Just a dry, rasping chuckle that scraped through the line and into my bones. I slammed the phone down and stumbled backward, heart in my throat. My legs carried me to the living room, where I pressed my back against the wall, staring at the front door, as though it might burst open. The laughter still echoed in my ears long after the call had ended, an echo I could not shake. From then on, I lived in a state of constant dread. I avoided the kitchen at night, though I could hear the phone ring during storms, muffled but insistent, calling me like a beacon. I considered ripping the unit from the wall, but the thought of angering whatever had attached itself to that line filled me with paralyzing fear. So, I endured. Days became weeks, each storm bringing fresh torment. I stopped sleeping properly, surviving on restless naps between calls, my body fraying under the weight of exhaustion. At work, I found myself distracted, staring at my desk until coworkers asked if I was all right. I lied, of course, saying the storms were keeping me up. No one pressed further, but the truth was becoming unbearable. The final straw came on a night when the rain fell harder than I had ever heard, drumming against the house like fists. The phone rang, sharp and shrill, and I told myself I would not answer. I sat in the living room, hands pressed to my ears, rocking slightly as though I could block it out. But then, my cell phone lit up. It was my landline number calling me. The screen glowed in the darkness, displaying my own home phone as the source of the call. My blood went cold. Trembling, I answered. The rain poured into my ear, deafening, drowning out the storm outside. And then, the whisper, "Eric, let me in." The whisper coiled around me like a noose. "Eric, let me in." I stood in the middle of my living room, my cell phone clutched so tightly that my fingers ached. The storm outside beat mercilessly against the windows, wind howling like a chorus of wolves. Lightning flared across the sky, throwing my shadow long and thin across the walls. My heart slammed so hard in my chest, I thought it might burst. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The voice on the line was no longer just a whisper. It was there, inside me, pressing against my thoughts, filling the space behind my eyes. My instincts screamed to end the call, to throw the phone against the wall and let it shatter, but my body wouldn't obey. Some part of me was caught, trapped, compelled to listen. "Eric," I forced words out, though they were more a rasp than a voice. "What are you?" The rain hissed louder in response, so loud I pulled the phone away from my ear. Then, softer, the whisper returned. "I am what waits. You've heard me your whole life, though you never listened." I felt my knees weaken. Memories flickered through my mind. Nights as a child when I had lain awake, certain I could hear voices in the white noise of the radio, or whispers threading through the static when the TV lost signal. I had always told myself it was my imagination. But what if it hadn't been? What if it had always been waiting, patient and silent, for me to finally pick up? I shook my head violently, backing away until I pressed against the wall. "Stay away from me," I managed. "You let me in when you answered." The whisper breathed. Doorways opened both ways. As if to punctuate the words, the front door rattled on its hinges. My blood turned to ice. I stared at the door, every muscle taut, expecting it to burst inward. The knob trembled as though someone on the other side were testing it, gently, persistently. Lightning lit the room again, and in the flash, I thought I saw a shape pressed against the frosted glass pane. A pale blur, featureless but intent. I blinked, and it was gone. The cell phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. The line had gone dead, but the sound of rain still filled my ears as though it had seeped into me. I sank down, curling against the wall, trembling like a child. I do not know how long I stayed there, listening to the storm, until at last exhaustion dragged me into a fitful, broken sleep. When morning came, the world outside seemed almost too bright. The storm had passed, the streets washed clean, birds already returning to the dripping branches. My house looked the same as it always had. Quiet, ordinary, untouched. For a moment, I dared to hope it had been nothing more than a dream. But when I walked to the front door, my stomach dropped. The lock was scratched, deep grooves, as though something with long nails had scraped against the metal, surrounded the keyhole. My hands shook as I traced them. No human fingernails could leave marks like that. I didn't go to work that day. I couldn't. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the landline phone on the wall, daring it to ring. It remained silent, as if mocking me. Hours crawled by, the house pressing in around me. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of settling wood made me flinch. That night, sleep refused to come. I sat in the living room with the television on low, the glow casting shifting patterns across the walls. Midnight passed, then 1 o'clock. The house was still. No storms, no phone calls. My eyelids grew heavy, and just as I began to drift, the screen went to static. The sudden hiss jolted me upright. The television buzzed with white noise, the sound almost identical to the rainfall that haunted the calls. I fumbled for the remote, stabbing at buttons, but nothing changed. And then, through the static, the whisper slid out. Eric. I dropped the remote, my breath caught in my throat. The voice wasn't coming from the phone anymore. It was bleeding through the television, soft and patient, threading between the waves of static. Did you think closing one door would keep me out? The screen flickered, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw a face form in the blur of black and white. Pale, hollow-eyed, smiling too wide. I stumbled backward, knocking into the coffee table. My mind screamed at me to run, but where could I go? It was in my house, in the devices, in the wires that ran through the walls. There was no escape. The static deepened, darkened, until it sounded less like rain and more like rushing water, like standing at the edge of a flood. My ears filled with it, drowning out every other sound until I could hear nothing but the whisper threaded through. Open the door. I turned toward the front of the house. The knob was turning, slow and deliberate. My body moved on its own, pulled like a puppet toward the hallway. Each step felt heavy, my legs fighting me, my chest tight. No, I muttered, forcing the word out through clenched teeth. You're not coming in. The knob stilled. The house fell silent, except for the hiss of the television. For a moment, I thought I had resisted, that I had shut it out. Relief surged in me, weak but real. Then the phone rang, not the cell, my landline. Its shrill tone tore through the silence, impossible to ignore. Ring, 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 I screamed, clamping my hands over my ears, but the sound only grew sharper, drilling into my skull. I staggered toward the kitchen, drawn like a moth to flame. The phone glowed in the dim light, receiver dangling slightly as if waiting. On the 7th ring, I snatched it from the wall. Rain roared into my ear, crashing and endless. My knees buckled, and I dropped to the floor, clutching the receiver. Eric. The whisper purred. You've already opened the door. The line went dead. and in the silence that followed, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, heavy, wet. My blood froze. I turned my head, staring into the shadows stretching from the kitchen doorway. The sound drew closer, each step deliberate, as though savoring the approach. My mouth opened to scream, but no sound came. The last thing I remember is the lights flickering out, plunging the house into darkness. The rain starting again. Not outside, but inside, cascading down the walls, dripping from the ceiling, soaking into the floor. When I woke, it was morning. The storm had passed, but my house was bone dry. The landline hung silent on the wall, as though nothing had happened. My cell phone lay shattered on the floor. But I knew it was not over. I hear it still, sometimes, in the quiet moments when the air feels heavy and the world goes still. In the hum of the refrigerator, in the static of the radio, in the faint rush of blood in my ears. The whisper is patient, and sooner or later, the phone will ring again. My name is Claire Whitmore, and though I hesitate to share what happened to me, I feel compelled to lay it out in its entirety, without omission, so that anyone who stumbles across my account might understand the weight of what I endured that night. I am not a superstitious person by nature. I was raised to value logic, to seek answers in science and reason, and I spent most of my life laughing off ghost stories, urban legends, and whispered tales that others swore were true. But when the rain came down on that cold autumn evening, and I found myself seeking shelter beneath a bridge on the outskirts of town, I learned that there are moments in life that will forever fracture one's sense of what is real and what belongs to shadow. I had not planned on walking home that night. The day had been long and bitter, the kind of day where everything seemed to unravel one thread at a time. I had left work late, drained by endless tasks and the heavy silence of a near-empty office. My car, as if conspiring against me, refused to start in the parking lot, its engine coughing weakly before dying altogether. With no taxis in sight and no buses running at that hour, I decided to walk, foolishly underestimating the storm that was gathering overhead. The air was already heavy with the promise of rain, and the sky had that bruised, restless look that warned of trouble. I thought I could beat it home. I was wrong. By the time I reached the industrial edge of town, the heavens broke open. Sheets of rain fell with a force that made the world blur into streaks of gray and black. My clothes clung to me. My shoes squelched with every step, and my hair plastered against my face. Lightning split the horizon, illuminating skeletal trees, and the glint of wet asphalt, followed almost instantly by the growl of thunder. It was in that moment, when the storm became too much to bear, that I spotted the bridge. It was an old structure, its concrete darkened with years of weather and streaked with moss. It stretched over a shallow, sluggish river the water swollen, now with the sudden downpour. The space beneath it yawned like a cavern, promising relief from the relentless rain. I hesitated at first, staring into the gloom, but practicality overcame caution. Shelter was shelter, and I was already soaked to the bone. Hugging my bag close, I hurried down the embankment and ducked beneath the bridge. The sound of the rain softened immediately, muted by the thick span of concrete above me. The dripping echoed hollowly, and the scent of wet earth and mildew was heavy in the air. I leaned against the wall, breathing hard, grateful to be momentarily shielded from the storm. My eyes adjusted to the dimness, and that was when I realized I was not alone. In the far corner, half hidden in shadow, crouched a man. At first, I thought my eyes were deceiving me, that perhaps the darkness was playing tricks, but no. It was unmistakable. He was there, huddled low, his knees bent, almost up to his chest, his hands resting lightly on the ground. He was thin, his silhouette sharp against the gloom, and his head was tilted at an unnatural angle, as though he had been waiting for me. His face, pale even in the low light, carried a smile. Not a warm, reassuring smile, but something else entirely. It was too wide, too fixed, like a mask stretched over his features. For a moment, I could not move. My heart hammered against my ribs, and the cold of the rain seemed to seep deeper into my bones, despite being out of it. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything, to break the silence, but no words came. The man did not blink. He did not stir. He simply crouched there, smiling at me, as if I were the one intruding. I must have blinked, perhaps from the sting of water in my eyes, or perhaps in some futile attempt to steady myself. But in that fraction of a second, the space where he had been was empty. My breath caught. I blinked again, straining to see into the gloom. The corner was bare. The man was gone. Yet the ground beneath him glistened, wet where it had not been before. My eyes dropped lower, and that was when I saw them footprints. Dark, damp prints smeared against the concrete floor, forming a circle around me. I stumbled back, pressing against the cold wall, my lungs seizing. The prints were not random. They looped, one after another, closing in, as if he had walked round and round me while I had not been looking. My pulse roared in my ears. I told myself there had to be an explanation, that maybe I had been mistaken. Maybe the water dripping from the bridge had created odd shapes. But no, these were deliberate, clear impressions of bare feet, each one placed with an unnerving precision. The air beneath the bridge grew heavy, thick enough to choke. My throat felt dry, though. Everything around me was damp. I tried to convince myself that the man had left, that perhaps he had slipped away silently into the storm while I blinked. Yet the prints suggested otherwise. They did not lead away. They ended where I stood. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but my legs would not obey. My body seemed rooted to the ground, frozen between disbelief and terror. I strained to hear over the muted drumming of the rain, half expecting the scrape of movement, the shuffle of feet, the whisper of breath just behind me. But the space remained oppressively silent, save for the occasional drip of water echoing like a hollow clock. Finally, with a desperate burst of will, I forced myself to move. My steps echoed loudly as I darted from beneath the bridge, splashing through the mud, heart racing so violently I thought it might burst. The rain pelted me again, soaking what little dryness I had gained, but I did not care. I wanted distance, light, life, anything to remind me that I was not trapped in that nightmare hollow. I did not stop until the bridge was far behind me, its silhouette swallowed by the storm. Even then, I could not shake the image of that smile. It clung to me, etched into my vision, haunting me with every blink. The footprints too, perfect, circling, purposeful, seared themselves into my memory. I told myself I had imagined it, that exhaustion and rain had warped my senses. But deep down, I knew better. Because later that night, when I finally reached the safety of my apartment, I noticed something that froze me to the marrow. Across my carpet, faint but undeniable, were damp footprints. They trailed from the front door to the center of my living room, and they circled my chair. I did not sleep that night. How could I, with those wet footprints darkening the carpet, looping around my chair in the same deliberate circle I had seen beneath the bridge? I stood there for a long time, staring at them, the storm still pounding against the windows. The water should have dried quickly in the warmth of my apartment. But the prints lingered, glistening faintly under the lamp. They were unmistakably human, bare feet pressed into the fibers, toes splayed as though someone had walked there only moments before. I backed away until my legs struck the edge of the couch, and I sank down without realizing it. My chest rose and fell too fast, each breath shallow, my hands trembling against my lap. I tried to summon reason, to tell myself the impossible could not be true. Perhaps I had tracked the water in myself, without realizing it. But my shoes had been on the entire time, heavy with mud, still sitting by the door. The prints did not match the soles of my shoes, nor did they match any pattern that could be explained away. They were naked feet, a man's feet. The circle ended at my chair. I do not know how long I sat there, watching them, waiting for something to happen. Each tick of the clock on the wall stretched like a string pulled taut, ready to snap. When at last I dared to blink, I half expected the prints to shift or multiply. But they remained fixed in place, silent reminders that I was not alone, even if my eyes could not see the one who left them. When the clock struck 2 in the morning, the storm outside broke into softer rainfall, but the tension in my apartment did not ease. It pressed in, stifling, heavy with a presence I could not name. By dawn, exhaustion finally dragged me under. I woke on the couch with my head crooked against the armrest, my body sore. For a moment, in the weak morning light, I thought perhaps it had all been a dream. But when I looked to the floor, the prints were gone. The carpet was dry, as if it had never been disturbed. Relief washed over me in a shaky wave, but it was not enough to erase the unease. My mind replayed the events in a loop. The man, crouched beneath the bridge, his too wide smile, the sudden vanishing. The circle of footprints. I could not unsee it. I tried to bury myself in routine that day, clinging to normality like a life raft. I showered, dressed, brewed coffee, even forced myself to head into work despite the exhaustion. The office was bland and quiet, humming with fluorescent lights and the clack of keyboards. I told myself that if I simply acted as though nothing had happened, it would fade into the background like a nightmare does once the sun is up. For hours, it almost worked. But every time I closed my eyes to blink, I saw the curve of that smile waiting for me in the shadows. It was after sunset that the real dread began again. The rain had returned, lighter this time, tapping against the glass of my apartment windows in rhythmic pulses. I sat with a book open in my lap, though I hadn't read a single sentence. In 20 minutes, my eyes darting constantly to the floor, the door, the corners of the room. When the knock came, I nearly screamed. It was soft, almost apologetic. 3 faint raps at the door. My heart seized. At this hour, in this weather, who could it be? I rose slowly, every nerve alight with warning. Without speaking, I crept toward the door and pressed my eye to the peephole. The hallway beyond was empty. No neighbor stood waiting. No delivery left behind. The corridor lights buzzed faintly, illuminating nothing but patterned carpet and beige walls. My skin prickled. I stepped back, pulse hammering. Then the knock came again. This time against the glass of my living room window. I spun, the book tumbling from my lap to the floor. Across the room, past the thin curtain, a shape pressed against the glass. Pale fingers, splayed wide, slid slowly downward, leaving trails of condensation. I could not see a face, only the outline of a hand impossibly high above the ground. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. There was no balcony, no fire escape, nothing a person could stand on. Yet the hand lingered there, caressing the window as though savoring the barrier between us. I stumbled back until my shoulders struck the wall. My throat locked, my voice trapped behind it. I wanted to scream, to call someone, but the sound died before it could form. The fingers drummed lightly, then vanished when I dared to rush forward and fling the curtain aside. The glass was bare, slick only with rain. No handprints remained. The night stared back at me, blank and indifferent. The silence that followed was worse than the knock. Every creak of the building, Every sigh of the wind became suspect. I locked the door, checked it twice, then 3 times. I drew the curtains tightly shut and left every light in the apartment blazing, as if illumination could shield me from what had already proven it could enter. Without permission. Yet deep down, I knew the locks were useless. The footprints had been inside. He had already been here. Sleep was impossible. I sat on the couch with my knees drawn up, my phone clutched in one hand, debating whether to call someone. Anyone. But what could I say? That a man had vanished beneath a bridge, only to reappear in my living room. That wet footprints had circled me in my sleep. It sounded mad. I could already imagine the strained silence on the other end of the line. The gentle suggestions that I seek rest, or worse, help. No one would believe me. And perhaps that was the cruelest part of it. I barely believed myself. Around 3 in the morning, the apartment grew cold. Not the natural chill of a stormy night, but something sharper, emptier. The warmth from the heater seemed swallowed, devoured by an unseen mouth. My breath misted faintly in front of me, though the thermostat insisted the room remain steady. And then I heard it. A sound so faint, I thought it might be the storm, until it repeated, slow and deliberate. Footsteps. Bare feet on carpet. My blood froze. They were behind me. I did not turn at first, paralyzed by the certainty that if I looked, I would see him. Crouched, smiling, waiting. The steps circled, patient, just as they had beneath the bridge. Each one thudded softly, muffled by the fibers of the rug, yet each landed with weight undeniable. They traced a slow, steady ring around me. My knuckles whitened around the phone. I wanted to call emergency services, to beg for help, but my thumb hovered uselessly above the screen. Who would come for footprints? Who would believe me? The steps completed their circle and stopped. Silence returned, pressing close, thick as the damp air beneath the bridge. I forced myself to look then, to whip my head toward the spot where the sound had ceased. Nothing. The room was empty, lit brightly, corners bare. My breath came ragged, my eyes wide. But on the carpet, darkening already, new prints bloomed. Fresh, wet, circling. This time, they did not vanish in the morning. The prints did not vanish with the daylight. When dawn finally crawled across the sky and filled my apartment with a gray pallor, they remained, damp and undeniable, circling the couch where I had sat all night. I stood over them, trembling, the early light spilling across their ridges. They were sharper than before, as if the weight behind them had grown heavier, more insistent. No longer could I pretend it was exhaustion or imagination. Whatever crouched beneath the bridge had followed me home, and it was not leaving. I considered leaving the apartment altogether. The thought of throwing clothes into a bag and vanishing crossed my mind more than once. But the realization struck me cold. If he could appear in a locked room, If he could leave prints on a third-story window and circle me unseen, then no place would keep him out. Running would do nothing. He would follow. He already had. The bridge was not his home. I was. That thought rooted itself deep, and the weight of it nearly buckled me. For 2 days, I avoided sleep. I kept every light blazing, music running in the background to drown out the silence. My phone clutched to my chest as if it could ward off the thing that stalked me. But each time fatigue dragged me under, I woke to new prints on the carpet. Sometimes they circled the bed. Sometimes they led to the bathroom door, stopping just outside, as if he had stood there for hours listening. Once, I woke to find them on the kitchen counter, bare feet somehow pressed into marble. No matter where I fled in the apartment, the circle always returned, always enclosing me. On the third night, I snapped. My nerves, stretched thin, tore open. I shouted into the silence, my voice hoarse, demanding he show himself, demanding he stop tormenting me. My words echoed flatly, swallowed by the walls, but something shifted. The air changed. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied, and I heard it. The low, rasping sound of breath. My own. I held still. No, it came from the corner of the room. Shallow, deliberate inhalations, like someone crouched in the dark, savoring each second. The sound lingered until my throat closed in terror. Then it stopped. The prints remained, circling. I tried to tell a friend the next day. I picked the one person I thought might listen. My coworker, Angela, who had always had a soft spot for ghost stories. Over coffee, I told her about the bridge, the man, the footprints. Her smile faltered as she listened. But when I reached the part about the prints circling me at home, I saw the disbelief creep in. She touched my arm gently, like one does with a fragile thing, and suggested maybe I was overworked, maybe sleep deprived, maybe both. I nodded as though agreeing, but inside I felt the hollowness widen. I was alone. No one would believe me until they saw him, and I prayed they never would. That night, the storm returned. Rain lashed the windows harder than before, thunder rolling deep, as if the sky itself were angry. I sat on the floor, my back pressed against the couch, staring at the door. It was then that I noticed something new. The prints were not just circling me now, they were multiplying. 2 sets, 3, overlapping, as if more than one pair of feet walked my apartment. My skin crawled. He was not alone. Or worse, he had never been one. He had been many, hiding in one shape. When the knock came again, I nearly collapsed. 3 soft raps against the door, patient, almost playful. I did not move. The knocks came again, this time at the window, then at the bathroom door, then, impossibly, from inside the bedroom closet. Each one measured, each one echoing through me. They stopped only when I covered my ears and began whispering nonsense to myself, anything to drown them out. When silence fell again, It was heavier than ever. I lowered my hands slowly, praying it was over. But the silence was not empty. It was watching. The last time I saw him was not in shadow, nor in some trick of reflection, but in full, merciless clarity. I had dozed off on the couch, exhaustion finally crushing me, and when my eyes snapped open, he was crouched just beyond the circle of prints. His head tilted sharply, neck craned too far. That same dreadful smile carved across his face. His eyes were pale, too pale, catching the faint light like glass. He did not move toward me. He did not need to. The circle of prints tightened of its own accord. New impressions sinking into the carpet, as if invisible feet pressed down with every heartbeat, closing me in. I could not scream. My voice was gone, strangled by terror. I could only watch as the circle shrank, as his grin widened, as his breath rasped louder. When the last gap in the circle sealed shut, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed everything, thick and absolute. I remember the sound of water dripping, steady as the rain beneath the bridge. I remember the feeling of cold, damp air brushing my cheek, and the certainty that he was closer than ever, crouched at my side. When the lights returned, the apartment was empty. The prince had vanished. So had he. It has been weeks since then, yet I cannot escape him. At first, I hoped it was over, that he had taken what he wanted and left. But every time it rains, I hear him. Soft knocks at the window, the faint sound of bare feet on carpet, the whisper of breath just behind me. The prince returned, faint at first, then darker, circling, always circling. I cannot leave. I cannot stay. He is with me wherever I go. And sometimes, when I wake in the dead of night, the air heavy with storm, I see him crouched at the foot of my bed, smiling that same impossible smile, waiting for the moment I blink. My name is Jonah Ruiz, and I consider myself a man of simple habits and ordinary routines. For years, I have lived alone in a modest apartment on the east side of the city, working long days at a financial office downtown, walking home each night through the same grid of streets. I was never the type to chase excitement or invite chaos into my life. Instead, I sought consistency, the quiet rhythm of work, rest, and repetition. It was during one of those repetitions, a rainy evening that should have been no different from the countless other, that I first encountered the black umbrella. That single detail, so ordinary in appearance, marked the beginning of events I struggle even now to put into words. Yet, I must, for silence only sharpens the memories, and the weight of them is too heavy to bear alone. The rain, that night, was relentless. Sheets of it falling from a sky that seemed intent on flooding the world. I remember the smell of wet pavement, the blur of traffic lights reflected in puddles, and the way my jacket clung uncomfortably to my skin. I had left the office later than usual, weighed down by reports I had needed to finish, and the streets had grown quiet, emptied of the usual evening crowd. There is a certain vulnerability in walking alone at night in a storm. One feels cut off, unseen, reduced to little more than a shadow moving through wind and water. I pulled my own umbrella closer, its thin fabric already sagging under the weight of the rain, and quickened my pace. It was only after I had crossed the second block that I noticed the figure behind me. At first, it was nothing remarkable. Just another person braving the storm, shielded by a wide black umbrella. The umbrella itself caught my attention because of its size. It was larger than most, perfectly round, and tilted low enough that I could not make out the face of the one carrying it. All I saw was the glossy dome of darkness, moving steadily through the rain, matching my path exactly. I dismissed it then, assuming coincidence. The city was full of strangers, and it was not unusual for two people to walk the same direction for a few blocks. Still, I felt a faint unease, the kind that hides in the corner of awareness and waits to be fed. By the third block, that unease had grown sharper. Each time I turned a corner, the umbrella turned as well. Each time I quickened my pace, the shadow beneath it seemed to keep perfect time. I told myself it was nothing. That paranoia was an easy trap on a night when visibility was poor and my nerves already raw from fatigue. Yet I could not help noticing that, while headlights of passing cars revealed fleeting glimpses of other pedestrians, faces under hoods, hands clutching briefcases or bags, the black umbrella revealed nothing at all. Beneath its canopy, there was no flash of skin, no outline of clothing, no discernible form. It was as though the umbrella floated by itself, upheld not by a person but by emptiness. I tightened my grip on my own umbrella and forced myself not to look back again. It is strange how quickly fear can reshape the world. Every sound of dripping water seemed louder, every shadow stretched longer. I felt as though I were no longer part of the ordinary city I had known for years, but a participant in some grim performance, staged solely for me. The rational part of my mind clung stubbornly to explanations: bad lighting, poor angles, my own imagination. But my instincts whispered otherwise. They told me that the thing behind me was not simply another late commuter. At the corner of 7th and Alder, I deliberately slowed and stepped aside, pretending to adjust the strap of my bag. My intention was clear: allow the other walker to pass, to reveal themselves as an ordinary neighbor or stranger, and in doing so dissolve my growing fears. The black umbrella approached, gliding through the rain, and for a brief moment I braced myself to see a face emerge from beneath it. None appeared. The umbrella drew even with me, though the space beneath its rim was wide open. It held nothing but darkness. A hollow void seemed to drink in the rain, each droplet vanishing before it could splash. My breath caught in my throat, An instinct forced me to step backward. Then, impossibly, the umbrella halted too. It did not move ahead, did not reveal its bearer by passing me. It simply stopped, inches from where I stood, as if aware of me, as if deliberately matching my hesitation. The downpour hammered around us, drowning the city in sound, yet in that suspended moment, I felt a silence descend, heavy and unnatural. I could not see a face, but I felt watched, studied, as though unseen eyes peered out from that void and measured my every weakness. Panic seized me. Without thinking, I turned and hurried down a side street, splashing through water and nearly losing my footing. My pulse throbbed in my ears louder than the rain itself. I did not dare look back until I had reached the glow of a convenience store at the next corner. Only then, when I stood panting beneath the buzzing neon sign, did I glance behind me. The street was empty. No black umbrella, no figure. Nothing but water rushing into the gutters. Relief came in a rush, but it was thin, brittle, easily cracked. I lingered inside the store, pretending to browse the narrow aisles, though what I sought was not food or drink, but reassurance that I was not alone. The clerk gave me a bored glance, uninterested in my damp clothes and shaking hands. After 10 minutes, I forced myself back outside, telling myself I had overreacted, that fatigue and rain had conjured illusions from shadows. I resumed my walk home, heart still unsteady, but calmer with each step. Yet as I neared my apartment building, something compelled me to glance down the opposite side of the street. There it was again, the black umbrella, distant but unmistakable, angled just enough that the hollow beneath it was visible even across the wet street. It was as though it had never left, only lingered in wait. I stumbled into my building, fumbling with the keys, nearly dropping them as I forced the lock. Once inside, with the door bolted, I pressed my back against the wood and listened. Nothing but the muffled sound of rain against windows. Still, I could not shake the image of that umbrella, the way it seemed to hide absence rather than presence. That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak of the building sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind against the window reminded me of the steady rhythm of rain striking the canopy of an unseen umbrella. I turned restlessly in bed until the first light of dawn seeped through the curtains. With the rising sun came a fragile sense of safety, though not peace. The encounter had left a mark on me, a subtle fracture in the ordinary life I had known. I told myself it had been nothing more than imagination, a tired mind weaving terror from shadows and water. Yet the following night, as I walked home under another curtain of rain, I found myself scanning every block, every corner, waiting to see if the black umbrella would return. And return it did. This time, it appeared sooner. 1 block from my office, lingering across the street, moving at my pace though traffic surged between us. Again, I saw no face, no body, only that hollow void collecting rain. I quickened my steps, weaving through the few remaining pedestrians. But each time I dared a glance, the umbrella was still there. From that night forward, it became my companion. Whether early or late, whether I took 7th Avenue or detoured through smaller side streets, it followed. Always at a distance, always careful to remain just near enough to be seen, never close enough to be confronted. It did not matter how quickly I walked, nor how suddenly I turned corners. The black umbrella adapted with inhuman patience, never hurrying, never faltering. Its presence became a shadow stitched to mine, a silent promise that I was no longer alone. For days I tried to explain it away. Perhaps multiple people in the city owned umbrellas of that size and shade. Perhaps chance alone aligned our routes. But deep down, I knew better. Each time I searched for a face beneath its canopy, I found only that same void, darker than the night around it, swallowing every drop of rain. And each time I thought I had lost it, I would glimpse it again, further down the street, as though mocking my attempts to escape. I began altering my routines. I left the office earlier some nights, later on others. I took buses instead of walking, then taxis instead of buses. Yet, even then, through the windows blurred with rain, I would sometimes catch a glimpse of that umbrella on the sidewalk, pacing me, patient as ever. My world, once defined by routine and familiarity, was shrinking into paranoia. Every evening became a question, not of whether I would see the black umbrella, but when. The strangest thing was how no one else seemed to notice. On sidewalks crowded with commuters, in the buzz of neon, lit intersections, strangers brushed past without a glance. Their eyes slid right over the black umbrella as though it were invisible. Once, in desperation, I even tried to draw attention to it. Standing outside a crowded cafe, I gestured to the street, whispering to a couple smoking under the awning, "Do you see that? The umbrella? Across the road." They gave me puzzled looks, squinting through the rain. One of them shrugged, the other laughed politely, and when I turned back, the umbrella was gone. But not for long. It always returned. The days bled together, my life narrowing into a cycle of dread. Morning brought a fragile reprieve. The umbrella never appeared under the sun. But as dusk thickened and the first drops of rain began to fall, my stomach would not. I grew resentful of the weather, watching forecasts obsessively, praying for clear skies. Even then, clouds seemed to conspire against me, and the city never lacked for storms. At work, I became withdrawn. My coworkers noticed my pallor, the shadows under my eyes, but I brushed off their questions with vague mutterings about insomnia. How could I explain the truth? Who would believe me if I said that a faceless shadow was tailing me beneath a canopy of rain? Some nights I wondered if I was going mad. Other nights I was certain of it. One evening, after nearly a week of this torment, I decided to confront it. Fear had gnawed too long at the edges of my life, and I was determined to tear the mask away. To prove once and for all there was something tangible beneath that umbrella. The rain had started as a drizzle when I left the office, soft enough that I thought perhaps I would be spared. But halfway home, the familiar sound arrived, the steady patter of rain thickening on fabric. I turned, and there it was again, 20 paces back, matching me step for step. I forced my feet to slow, my lungs to steady. The street was nearly deserted, only a few cars hissing by on wet asphalt. My hands trembled as I closed my own umbrella, letting the rain soak me, so both my hands would be free. Then I spun on my heel and strode directly toward it. The black dome loomed closer, its edges glistening under the amber streetlights. No face appeared. I quickened my pace. 10 steps, 5, 3. I was nearly upon it. I reached out, fingers outstretched, ready to grab the fabric and rip it aside. But the instant my hand touched it, cold surged through me. Not the chill of wet cloth, but an emptiness that bit to the bone, like plunging my arm into a void deeper than night. My fingers slipped through nothing. The umbrella did not resist me. It dissolved, folding away like smoke. In its place, for the briefest of moments, I glimpsed a space darker than darkness itself. And in that hollow, shapes moved. Too many shapes, writhing, twisting, pressing against the boundary of visibility. I tore my hand back with a strangled cry, stumbling into the street. The horn blared. Headlights swelled. I threw myself sideways, just in time as a car screeched past, spraying water across my body. By the time I regained my footing, the umbrella was gone. The street behind me was empty. That night I drank heavily, hoping to drown the memory. But alcohol only blurred the edges, never erasing the core. I woke shivering in bed, clutching my damp jacket. The phantom sensation of cold still lodged in my arm. The days that followed were worse. The umbrella no longer kept its distance. Sometimes I would catch it, standing directly across the street from my apartment, unmoving, waiting through the night. Once, when I descended to the lobby to collect my mail, I found it leaning against the glass door, blocking the entrance like a sentinel. The doorman, who had been stationed at the desk the entire time, swore he saw nothing. I began leaving lights on in every room, as though brightness could shield me. Sleep became fractured, a scattering of minutes stolen between jolts awake. My body weakened, my nerves frayed. In the mirror, my face looked like that of a stranger, gaunt and hollow-eyed. One rainy evening, unable to bear the confinement of my apartment, I sought refuge at a bar a few blocks away. The crowd there was loud, warm, and ordinary. For a brief time, I felt normal again, sipping cheap whiskey and listening to strangers laugh. But as I stepped outside near midnight, pulling my coat tight against the storm. My heart sank. Across the street, illuminated by the flickering sign of a laundromat, the black umbrella waited. Its canopy dripped steadily, though no wind stirred it. Desperation clawed through me. I marched straight into the rain, crossing traffic without care, determined to seize it once more, to demand answers or end whatever nightmare had claimed me. Yet the closer I came, the more the world seemed to blur. Buildings faded, sounds dulled, until there was only the rain, the pavement, and that umbrella. The void beneath it seemed deeper than before, wide enough to swallow the entire street. I felt a pull, as though gravity itself bent toward it. My legs wavered. A voice broke through. Someone shouted my name. I turned to see a co-worker, Mark, emerging from a nearby cab, calling to me with concern. The moment my attention shifted, the umbrella vanished. Just like that. Gone, as though it had never existed. Mark guided me back to the bar, convinced I was drunk or ill. I tried to explain, but the words sounded insane even to my ears. He offered to walk me home, but I refused, unwilling to endanger anyone else. Still, I was grateful. His interruption had broken the spell, snapped the tether that threatened to drag me into that void. Back in my apartment, drenched and shaking, I resolved to change everything. If routine had drawn this thing to me, then breaking routine might free me. I requested leave from work, packed a bag, and boarded a train out of the city the next morning. The countryside blurred past my window, green hills washed clean by rain, and I felt something close to relief for the first time in weeks. For 3 days, I stayed in a motel off the highway, far from the streets I knew. It rained only lightly, and each time I ventured out, I scanned every corner, every passerby. No umbrella appeared. I dared to hope I had escaped. The fourth night, sleep finally came heavy and deep. But when I woke before dawn, groggy and parched, I noticed something on the chair beside the bed. My throat tightened. Propped neatly against the chair back was an umbrella. Black, wide, and dripping though the room was dry. The carpet beneath it glistened with water. I fled. I abandoned the motel at sunrise, leaving my belongings behind, and returned to the city despite my dread. Running had proven useless. Whatever it was, it had no boundaries. Now I live in a limbo of vigilance. Each time rain clouds gather, I feel my pulse quicken, waiting for the first glimpse of that void, shadowed canopy. It does not always show itself, which makes the waiting worse. Days may pass without a sighting, and then, just as I begin to believe it gone, I turn a corner and find it standing there, patient. Watchful, waiting. I cannot tell if it is following me alone, or if others have felt its gaze. Perhaps it has chosen me specifically, for some reason I cannot fathom. Or perhaps the city is full of umbrellas like it, each shadowing a different soul, each unseen by the rest. I have tried to research, combing old newspapers and online forums for stories of faceless figures or umbrellas without owners. But I find nothing that matches. The silence of history feels deliberate, as though others before me were erased before they could speak. Lately, I have noticed changes in myself. My reflection flickers strangely in windows when I walk at night. My outline seems softer, less defined, as if rain passes through me more easily than it should. And sometimes, in the patter of raindrops against my umbrella, I hear an echo, faint and delayed, like a second rhythm mirroring my own. I know what it is. The sound of rain on another umbrella, close by, hidden in plain sight. I am no longer sure where this ends. But I am certain of one thing: the umbrella is patient. It has waited this long, and it will wait as long as it must. The days became indistinguishable. Gray skies bled into grayer nights, and my thoughts swam in the endless drum of rainfall. I found myself keeping the blinds closed, even when the sun was out, not because I feared the light, but because I no longer trusted my eyes. Any reflection, any shadow could conceal it. It had taught me that appearances were masks, and I began to wonder how many other masks I had mistaken for reality. The umbrella did not appear every night, but absence brought no comfort. Absence meant waiting, dreading the inevitable return. And when it returned, it no longer confined itself to the streets. Twice, I woke to find it leaning just outside my window, on the fire escape, its canopy spilling rain that should not have been there. Another time, I walked into my kitchen and saw water dripping steadily from the ceiling, only to look up and find the black umbrella suspended against plaster, open wide as though the storm existed only above me. I screamed then, hurled a chair at it, and the chair passed through nothing but air. The umbrella folded itself silently and was gone, leaving only a widening puddle at my feet. That was when I realized the city was no longer enough to contain it. It could follow me anywhere. And worse, it was no longer content to be seen only at a distance. The boundary it had once kept between us was dissolving. One evening, I left the apartment determined not to return. I had no destination, only the certainty that, if I stayed within those four walls another night, I would lose my mind. I walked without direction, letting the rain guide me, until the streets thinned into old industrial lots and crumbling warehouses. The air smelled of rust and stagnant water, a place forgotten by most of the city. Yet, even here, where no one else walked, I felt the weight of its presence behind me. I turned a corner, and there it was, no longer trailing but waiting, planted in the center of the road like a gatekeeper. Its canopy was tilted lower than ever, almost brushing the ground, as though inviting me to step closer and see what lay beneath. My body shook, but I forced myself forward. I had grown tired of running, tired of hiding. If this thing wanted me, then let it take me. At least the torment of waiting would end. The rain seemed to fade as I neared it, muffled to a dull hiss. My footsteps splashed in puddles that made no sound. When I reached it, I reached not with hands, but with words. My voice was hoarse, unsteady, but I spoke all the same. "What do you want from me?" The umbrella tilted, ever so slightly, like the head of a listener. The void beneath, it pulsed, rippled, as if stirred by the sound of my voice. Shapes moved within. Elongated arms, twisting faces, fragments of things I cannot name. They pressed against the darkness like creatures trapped beneath ice. "You followed me for weeks," I said, though I could barely hear myself. "Why me?" For the first time, something answered. Not with sound exactly, but with vibration, resonance, a tremor in the bones. The rain around me shivered, each droplet freezing in the air for a heartbeat. The message was simple, terrifying in its clarity. "You saw me." My stomach dropped. That was all. Out of countless faces on countless streets, I had looked too long, noticed what others ignored, and that act alone had bound me to it. Recognition was invitation. I had opened a door without knowing it. The umbrella lowered further, its rim brushing the water at my feet. I felt the pull again, stronger than ever, dragging me toward the void. This time, I did not resist. My body leaned forward, inch by inch, as though the marrow itself yearned for the hollow. I glimpsed within shapes, coiling upward, mouths opening wider, ready to receive me. Then, a sound split the air, a shrill siren from a nearby factory, announcing the late shift change. The blast shattered the stillness, and for a moment, the void faltered. The pull loosened, and I fell backward onto the pavement, gasping for air. When I looked up, the umbrella was gone. I crawled to the curb, soaked and trembling, and wept. Not with relief, because I knew it was not finished, but with despair. It had almost taken me, and some part of me had wanted to go. The next days were a blur. I no longer bothered with work, with food, with messages left unanswered on my phone. My existence had narrowed to a single truth. Sooner or later, I would step beneath that umbrella and not return. The only question was when. And then came the final night. The storm was the worst I had ever seen, the sky a solid wall of water. Power failed across the city, leaving blocks of darkness, lit only by occasional lightning. I sat in my apartment, candles flickering, waiting. I did not even flinch when the first drip echoed from the corner of the room. One drop, then another, until the steady patter grew louder. In the storm outside, I turned, and there it was, open wide in the middle of my living room. Black, dripping, eternal. Beneath it, the void churned hungrily, shapes pressing outward. Rain spilled in rivers across the floorboards, soaking into the rug. My books, my furniture, all of it blurred and dissolved around the edges, as though reality itself bent toward that hollow. I stood, barefoot, in the water and felt the inevitable pull. I could no longer pretend this was something I could escape. The umbrella had waited, patiently, until I was worn thin enough to surrender. As I stepped closer, I felt my outline loosening, my edges dissolving like ink in water. My hand reached forward, and for the first time, the void reached back. Fingers, countless and cold, grasped mine. They were not cruel, not violent. They were simply insistent. The last thing I remember clearly is the sensation of crossing a threshold, of stepping not into shadow, but into absence. The rain above me ceased, replaced by silence deeper than death. Faces swirled around me, some screaming, some whispering, all dissolving into one another. I realized, with a final shudder of clarity, that the umbrella was not an object at all. It was a door, and I had walked through it. I cannot tell you where I am now. Time does not move here, nor space. The void stretches without end, filled with the echoes of those who saw and could not look away. Perhaps, if you have read these words, you will imagine me gone. But sometimes, when storms gather over the city, when umbrellas bloom like dark flowers along the streets, I feel myself close again to the world. I left. And if your eyes linger too long on the wrong shadow, if you notice the rain dripping into a hollow where no face should be, then perhaps you, too, will understand. The umbrella is patient. It waits for recognition, and once you see it, you will never walk alone again. My name is Fiona Clark, and I have always considered myself a woman of routine and reason. I am 27 years old, employed as a paralegal in a mid-sized firm, and I live alone in a modest apartment on the second floor of a brick building that has stood for nearly half a century. I mention these details not because they are extraordinary, but precisely because they are not. My life has been steady, measured, predictable. There was nothing about me or my surroundings that should have drawn the strange occurrence I'm about to describe. And yet, one evening, as the rain lashed against my window, I noticed something so small, so easily dismissed, that it unsettled every certainty I had about safety and about being alone. It was late, perhaps close to midnight, and I was sitting at my desk by the window. The rain had been steadily all day, drumming against the roof, making the streets glisten under the pale lamps outside. I found comfort in the sound. It dulled the noise of the city and wrapped the night in a kind of softness. My window faced east, overlooking a narrow alley between my building and the one across. It wasn't the most beautiful view, but it offered me privacy. The opposite building was of similar height, its brick face stained by years of weather, its windows dark at that hour. I had left my desk lamp on while I worked through a stack of documents, the yellow glow pooling over the papers. Occasionally, I looked up, watching rivulets of rain trace downward across the glass. I had always liked the way raindrops meandered, joining others, forming crooked rivers that slid lazily to the sill. It was hypnotic, a quiet reminder of the world continuing beyond my thoughts. But that night, one of those rivulets did not move downward. It stretched upward, cutting against the flow, as though gravity had suddenly reversed for a single droplet. At first, I thought my eyes had played a trick on me, blurred from reading too long. I blinked hard, rubbed them, and looked again. Still, among the countless silver threads running down, there was one thin line crawling slowly up the pane. My chest tightened, and I leaned closer, thinking there must be a crack in the glass, or perhaps condensation that distorted the path. Yet it was neither. It was too deliberate, too neat. The upward trail was curved, as if a fingertip had been dragged from the bottom toward the top. A strange chill ran across my shoulders, though the room was warm. I glanced toward the alley. Nothing stirred there, only the glossy pavement gleaming under the dim light. No figure, no ladder, no shadowed outline of someone reaching for my window. I told myself it was simply an odd quirk of the rain, some trick of surface tension, and I returned to my work. But I could not shake the image. Each time I looked back, the trail remained, stubbornly distinct from the others. Half an hour passed, and I rose to prepare for bed. My bedroom was the same room as my workspace. My apartment was not large, and my bed stood a few feet away from the desk. I switched off the lamp, leaving only the streetlight glow filtering faintly through the rain-streaked window. I lay down, but my eyes kept drifting back to the glass. The upward line glistened, faintly, like a scar among veins of silver. I eventually fell asleep facing it, uneasy, but telling myself I would laugh about it in the morning. The laughter never came. I woke in the small hours, not to the sound of thunder or the rattle of rain, but to silence. A silence so deep it pressed against my ears, as though the storm had withdrawn into itself. I sat up, disoriented, the faint glow of the street lamps casting the window in a ghostly sheen. My eyes adjusted, and I saw it again. Another line. This one had not gone up or down, but sideways, drawn across the glass at the level of my head. My breath caught in my throat. I got out of bed slowly, my feet cold against the floor. The rational part of me insisted it was nothing unusual. Condensation dragged by a breeze, or the oddities of physics. Yet as I approached, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The line was not beaded with droplets like the others. It was smeared, faintly cloudy, exactly like the trace a finger would leave on a fogged surface. Except the glass was wet on the outside. And I lived on the second floor, my window opening into an alley, with no balcony, no fire escape, and no ledge broad enough for a person to stand. I pressed my face close, scanning the alley again. Empty. The opposite building's windows stared back darkly, unlit and unbroken. I stood there for several minutes, heart pounding, until the rain resumed with a patter that made me almost weep with relief. The sound was ordinary again, familiar, covering the memory of silence. I told myself I had been half dreaming, caught between sleep and waking. I returned to bed, forcing my eyes shut. But the next morning, when the rain had cleared and sunlight slipped into the room, I saw them still. 2 marks on the glass, the upward streak, and the sideways smear. They had dried into faint residues, visible when the light hit just right. I touched the inside of the pane. Smooth, cold, clean. The marks were outside. My throat tightened with the knowledge. Someone, or something, had left them there. The day passed in restless distraction. At work, I caught myself staring at reflections in computer screens, imagining lines crawling against glass. By evening, clouds had gathered again, and rain returned with a steady rhythm. I dreaded going home, but habit and fatigue pulled me back to my apartment. I paused at the bottom of the stairwell, staring up into the dim corridor that led to my door. Every sound seemed sharper: the drip of water from my coat, the creak of my boots on the steps. When I unlocked the door, the air inside felt colder than it should. I switched on the lights and forced myself to look at the window immediately, not allowing dread to build. At first, it seemed ordinary, just rain weaving downward. Relief softened me, and I laughed under my breath. I had frightened myself over nothing. But as I set my bag down and turned toward the kitchen, something flickered at the edge of my vision. I froze, head snapping back. The rivulets ran as before, except for one. A new line, thinner than the rest, creeping upward in real time. I watched, unblinking, as it inched higher, pausing, then continuing, as though guided by a careful hand. This time, I did not move closer. I stood rooted in the center of the room, my skin crawling. The line reached halfway up the pane before stopping abruptly, ending in a curved hook. A fingerprint-shaped blot marked the end, undeniable. I whispered aloud, "Who's there?" My own voice startled me in the quiet. No answer came, only the relentless drumming of the rain. I slept with the lights on that night, though sleep is not the right word for it. I drifted in and out, every creak of the building pulling me awake. At dawn, the line was still there, dried faintly like the others. I considered calling my landlord, but what could I say? That the rain outside my window behaved strangely. That someone climbed 2 stories in a narrow alley just to trace marks on my glass. He would laugh, or worse. He would look at me with the same doubtful expression my coworkers sometimes gave when I seemed distracted. And yet, deep inside, I knew it was no prank. There was intent behind those lines. The way they curved, the way they ended. They were not random paths of water. They were messages. The third night confirmed it. The storm was harsher. Wind hurling rain against the walls rattling the panes. I tried to ignore it, burying myself in work, headphones in, music drowning the sound. Hours passed until fatigue pulled me toward bed. I removed the headphones, and the silence struck me again. Not the absence of sound, but a deliberate hush, like the world holding its breath. I turned toward the window, already braced. 3 new streaks glistened there, crossing each other, forming a crude shape, a square. Inside it, a single vertical line like a tally mark. I stared numb. My heart beat so violently I thought I might faint. Something outside wanted me to see. I did not sleep that night. I lay on my bed with the light on, eyes fixed on the crude square with its single tally mark that the streaks had left behind. My body wanted rest, but my mind rejected it, circling endlessly around the impossible fact that the marks had been shaped with intention. They were not droplets blown together by wind. They were not the quirk of some chemical residue on the glass. They were deliberate, as if someone stood outside my window in the storm, dragging a finger across the pane. But I could not comprehend how. My apartment was suspended over an empty alley, with no ledges, no balconies, no means for a person to reach my window. As the night bled into morning, the shape faded, drying into faint stains like the others. When dawn finally arrived, I rose in a haze of exhaustion. I showered, dressed, and forced myself to walk to work, though each step felt like moving through water. The office was mercifully busy, keeping me occupied with papers and deadlines. I avoided windows, avoided reflections, avoided the possibility of seeing another trace. Still, in the corners of my vision, I kept expecting to see thin lines dragging upward against every pane of glass I passed. When I returned home that evening, the air was heavy with humidity, the streets slick with lingering drizzle. I paused at the bottom of my stairwell again, staring up toward my apartment. The thought of entering made my chest constrict. I told myself I could call a friend, invite someone over, but who? I had not cultivated close connections here. My family lived in another state, and most of my acquaintances were co-workers who saw me as reliable, but not particularly warm. I had chosen solitude, and now it weighed on me. When I finally unlocked the door and stepped inside, I was struck at once by the silence. The hum of my refrigerator, the faint tick of the wall clock, even the muted traffic outside seemed swallowed by it. I forced myself to turn toward the window. For a moment, I saw nothing unusual. Just streaks of fresh rain inching downward. Relief trickled into me, fragile, tentative. Then I saw it. 2 lines, running upward this time, parallel to each other. They rose almost to the top of the pane, before stopping abruptly. I stood frozen, every muscle locked. I could not look away. My heart thudded against my ribs, my breath shallow. They resembled fingers, long, narrow, pressing against the glass from outside. The rational voice in my head screamed for explanations. The rain, the glass, surface tension, anything. But another part of me, colder, quieter, knew better. These were not accidents. They were not random. I backed away slowly, step by step, until my legs pressed against the edge of my bed. My phone lay on the nightstand, and I grabbed it with shaking hands. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but the screen reflected my own pale face, and I could not think of a number to dial. The police. What would I tell them? That the rain had drawn pictures on my window, that invisible fingers were scratching messages into the glass. They would dismiss me, maybe note my name, maybe not, but they would not come. Instead, I sat on the bed clutching the phone until my knuckles hurt. Hours passed. I must have drifted into some half sleep because I woke with a start when thunder rattled the building. My eyes flew to the window. New marks had joined the others. Another square, larger this time, with 2 tally marks inside. The message was progressing, counting. I did not move until daylight. The next day, at work, I nearly broke down. My coworkers noticed my pallor, the shadows under my eyes. One asked if I was sick. I muttered something about not sleeping well. How could I tell them the truth? They would laugh, pity, or worse, edge away from me. So I buried myself in files, working until my vision blurred. When 5 o'clock came, I dreaded returning home, but what choice did I have? My rent, my belongings, my life were there. The rain greeted me again that night, relentless, tapping against the windows as if in greeting. I hesitated in the doorway of my apartment, every nerve alert. The silence was heavier than before, as though the building itself held its breath. I turned toward the window, bracing myself. There it was, a third square. Inside, 3 tallies. I could not pretend anymore. Someone, something, was communicating. A count, a measure, a warning. I did not know which, but I knew it would continue. And I knew, with a dreadful certainty, that I was the only one who could see it. I fled that night. I packed a small bag, stuffed it with clothes, my laptop, and some toiletries. I left the apartment without looking back at the window. I checked into a budget hotel, a few blocks away, telling myself I just needed distance. A night away from that pane of glass. The room smelled faintly of mildew, the carpet thin, but it was different, unfamiliar, and therefore safe. I convinced myself of that as I lay on the stiff mattress. But sleep betrayed me again. I woke in the night, the sound of rain heavy against the hotel window. For a moment, I dared to hope it was ordinary, the simple comfort of water on glass. Then I looked. There, faint and unmistakable, were lines creeping upward. My chest constricted. I stumbled out of bed, pressed myself against the opposite wall. My breath came shallow, ragged. The streaks formed quickly this time, almost eager. Another square. Another tally. 4. It had followed me. I stayed at the hotel until morning, then checked out, trembling, hollow-eyed. Where could I go? I could not run from rain. Windows existed everywhere. The thing, whatever it was not bound to the brick of my apartment. It had attached itself to me. I returned home because there was nowhere else to go. My apartment greeted me like a coffin. I closed the curtains, but the faint sound of rain persisted, muffled, insistent. I tried to drown it out with music, with television, with anything that reminded me of normal life. But whenever I gathered the courage to peek, the marks were there. More squares, more tallies, climbing higher across the glass. By the end of that week, there were 7. 7 squares, 7 tally marks, and with each one, I felt the air grow heavier, the silence deepen, as if the world itself were retreating. On the 8th night, something changed. The storm was violent, wind howling, rain slamming, so hard it rattled the window frame. I sat curled on the bed, unable to look, yet unable not to. Hours passed, my eyes burning with exhaustion, my heart thudding like a trapped bird. Then I saw it, the streaks forming faster than before, as though urgency had gripped the invisible hand. A square appeared, but this time no tally. Instead, inside it, a shape, a circle, crude but clear. I gasped, clutching my chest. The square had changed. The message was shifting. I could not decipher it, but dread coiled tight in my gut. It was not simply counting anymore. It was saying something else. The circle remained through the night, dried faintly by morning. I stared at it until my vision blurred, as though looking long enough might give me understanding. It did not. I called my mother that day, desperate for some connection. I told her only that I had been having trouble sleeping, that the storms were making me anxious. She suggested I visit her, stay a few days. But I shook my head, though she could not see me. The thought of bringing this presence into her home filled me with terror. It was mine now, my burden. That night, the silence returned earlier, as though anticipating me. I sat rigid in my chair by the desk, watching the glass. I felt absurd, like a sentry waiting for an attack no one else believed in. The rain fell, steady, steady, until lines began to move again. This time, they did not form a square. They dragged upward in long strokes, left, right, then across. A shape emerged slowly, unmistakably, a crude outline of a face. 2 hollow ovals for eyes, a downward slash for a mouth. It stared in at me, glistening with fresh rain, distorted yet undeniably human. I could not breathe. The room spun. The face lingered for what felt like hours, water dripping from its marks, mocking me with its permanence. I curled into myself, rocking, whispering no again and again. By morning, it had dried into ghostly stains that sunlight could not erase. I am writing this now because I need some record, some proof that I am not unraveling without cause. If anyone finds this later, if my words survive longer than I do, perhaps they will know it was real. The rain is falling again outside as I type. I have already seen new streaks beginning to gather, and I know with a certainty that chills me more than anything else that the marks are building towards something. A message, a conclusion, an event. Each square, each tally, each shape is leading to a final point. I just do not know if I will survive long enough to see what it is. By the 9th night, I had stopped pretending that this was something I could ignore. The marks were no longer faint curiosities. They were an unfolding dialogue carved into glass and rain. Each square, each tally, each crude shape left me with the same impression. It was counting down or counting up toward an end I did not want to reach. And yet I could not stop watching. To look away felt more dangerous than to face it head on. The storm that night was relentless. Water streamed in sheets down the brick walls outside, the alley running like a narrow river between buildings. I sat in my chair by the desk, body, rigid hands gripping the armrests so tightly my knuckles were bloodless. I told myself that if the marks came again, I would not watch. I would close the curtains and bury myself in bed. But when the silence descended, thick, absolute, suffocating, I knew it was too late. My eyes dragged back to the window. The streaks began to form almost immediately, this time not in hesitant dribbles, but in quick, decisive strokes. A square appeared, larger than any before, nearly spanning the entire pane. Inside it, not tallies, not a circle, but letters. Crooked, imperfect, yet unmistakable. Foe, my name. I stumbled backward, crashing into the bed frame. The air in my lungs froze solid. My heart stopped, and then pounded so violently, I thought my ribs might splinter. I could not convince myself it was random. Rain could not spell. Gravity could not scrawl names. Something was outside, pressing against the glass, writing with an invisible hand that knew me. I covered my face with my hands and screamed, but the sound felt devoured by the silence. No neighbor banged on the wall, no footsteps approached. The world outside my window did not care. When I lowered my hands, the letters still glistened, slick and shining, with fresh rain. My own name staring back at me like an accusation. I did not remember moving, but suddenly I was at the front door, bag half packed, keys in my hand. I bolted into the hallway, down the stairwell, into the wet night. I ran until my legs burned, water soaking me, hair plastered to my face. I did not care where I went. Anywhere but there. Hours later, I found myself at a 24-hour diner near the highway. I must have looked wild, dripping and pale, because the waitress gave me a wary glance before handing me a mug of coffee. I sat in the booth trembling, staring at the reflection of neon lights in the black window beside me. The glass was clear, ordinary, nothing moving but the faint distortion of raindrops sliding down. But every time I blinked, I imagined new lines beginning to creep upward. I stayed until sunrise, nursing the coffee long after it had gone cold. Then, hollow with exhaustion, I walked back to my apartment. The streets shone with rain, but the storm had passed. When I unlocked the door, the air inside was damp, musty. I wanted to turn and leave again, but my body dragged me forward, unable to resist the compulsion to look. The window was different now. All the squares, all the tallies, all the shapes, gone. The pane was spotless, gleaming in the morning sun as though scrubbed clean. My heart sank deeper at the sight. It was not relief I felt. It was dread. The slate had been wiped for something new. I tried to sleep that day, but every creak of the building jolted me awake. I ate nothing. I moved from chair to bed to floor, restless and hunted, waiting for the next storm, because I knew it would come. It had not finished with me. When the clouds gathered again that evening, I felt my chest constrict. The first drops pattered against the glass like fingernails. I sat rigid on the bed, unable to move, unable to pretend. The silence arrived soon after, swallowing the hum of electricity, the tick of the clock, the life of the world. And then the marks came. This time there was no square, no slow construction. A single stroke dragged upward, thick and certain. Then another beside it. Then more, branching outward, jagged, crooked. The lines multiplied, covering the pane in a chaos of dripping strokes until they converged into something unmistakable, a hand. A handprint, pressed against the glass from the outside. Larger than my own, fingers long, palm broad. It lingered there, rivulets coursing down its outline. My heart thundered. I could not breathe. I stepped closer in a daze, compelled despite every instinct, screaming at me to run. My own hand lifted slowly, trembling, until it hovered just inches from the glass. The rain on the pane distorted the print, made it shimmer, but it was still there, undeniable. I lowered my hand until my palm touched the glass directly opposite the mark. The cold shot through me like ice, and then it moved. The handprint shifted, sliding downward against the rain, dragging streaks with it. It moved as though pressing harder, trying to find purchase, trying to push through. I stumbled backward, knocking over the chair. My scream caught in my throat. The glass groaned faintly, a sound I had never heard before, as if strained by weight from the outside. I ran to the door, but before I could twist the knob, another sound stopped me. A faint, deliberate tap on the window. I turned slowly. The handprint was gone. In its place were words, scrawled in dripping letters larger than before. Letty Mem E Ian. My knees buckled. I pressed against the wall, head shaking violently. No, no, no. This could not be happening. My name had been bad enough. But this was invitation, demand, intent. The letters blurred and dripped away as rain coursed over them, but the silence held, expectant. I knew then that it would not stop. It would return again and again until I obeyed, until I opened the window. did not open it that night, or the next. I sealed it with duct tape, pushed furniture against it, but each storm brought new messages, new handprints, new insistence. Fioe.
Looking in.
Open. I stopped sleeping. My body wasted. I lived in constant dread, pacing my apartment like a prisoner. The outside world faded, reduced to the tiny square of glass that dictated my existence. On the 12th night, the storm was so violent it rattled the walls. Crouched in the corner, hands over my ears, trying to drown the sound. But the silence came anyway, cutting deeper than thunder, more terrible than the wind. When I looked, the entire window was covered. Not just lines, not just marks, but a shape pressed against the glass, as though an entire figure leaned close. A face, larger than human, distorted by water, but unmistakable. Eyes like pits, mouth stretched in a thin slash. It filled the pain, staring in at me. I screamed until my throat tore. The glass shuddered, bulged inward slightly, as if straining to break. And for the first time, I heard something beyond the silence. A voice, low and rasping, threading through the hiss of rain. Let me in. I don't remember what happened after that. I must have lost consciousness, because I woke sprawled on the floor at dawn. The storm had passed. The window was pristine again, as though nothing had ever touched it. But the silence remains with me, even now. I hear it at the edges of every sound, waiting. I see faint streaks in every window I pass, even on clear days. I know it is not finished. I am writing this final account because I fear I will not last through the next storm. I feel it coming, heavy in the air, electric. When it arrives, I do not trust myself to resist. The messages have worn me down, stripped me of reason. A part of me already wonders what will happen if I obey. If I open the latch and let whatever waits outside step through. Perhaps it will be an end. Perhaps a beginning. Perhaps the truth of why rain climbs upward against glass. But if this is found after, if my apartment stands empty and my window wide open, know that I did not simply vanish. I was taken, and the storm was the doorway.